Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Detecting Modern PowerShell Attacks with SIEM. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Justin Henderson and Tim Garcia. Both are SANS instructors. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Justin.
First off, thanks everybody for joining today. I'm really excited about this. This is basically focusing on catching the bad guys, in this case specifically with PowerShell. If you guys like what we're talking about today, one thing I'm just shamelessly going to point out here is this first slide. We have the first ever SIEM and Tactical Analytics Summit, which I begged SANS to give us. This is a 2-day summit focusing only on actionable detection techniques to catch the bad guys. Now, I asked for this and I am co-chairing this with Ishmael. I am in no way getting financial gain from it. It's just we need this so bad. So if you like what we're talking about today, this slide will be up at the end again, and I would highly recommend it. It's going to be the best SANS summit ever. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be talking about PowerShell. Specifically, how can we catch evil PowerShell attacks using a SIEM and logging environment? And I want to emphasize the SIEM portion of this because by having certain logs in our SIEM, it's going to make things much easier to catch and at scale. So the focus here is on pure play catching the bad guys, and I'm really excited about this. I am a huge PowerShell advocate. We need it. As defenders, you should be using PowerShell. As attackers, you should be using PowerShell. I use this every day for even the strangest of things, not just for managing Windows, even things like automatic IDS security onion deployments, automatic firewall provisioning. I use PowerShell for just about anything. You have home automation, you can PowerShell interface to that. PowerShell is just so amazing, but that's what makes it so scary. And we're going to talk about that. And again, then we're going to go straight into some really awesome techniques on how to catch this. So with that being said, my name is Justin Henderson. I am the author of SEC 555, or we dub it Triple Nickel, which is SIEM with Tactical Analytics. And this is a course, and what we're talking about today is really taken right out of 555. It's focusing your SIEM for analysis and detection, rather than the age-old collecting logs centrally and then ignoring them in one spot. SIEM is a sore subject. There's a lot of bad deployments, and hopefully things like what we're talking about today can change the mentality and show how powerful it can become. I am also a GSE, and I have way too many certifications. That is good for you because all it means is I don't have a life short of the security community. Tim is partnering with me on this talk. Tim is fantastic. He is also a 555 instructor. Both of us are big fans on sharing things in GitHub and with the security community. So we are pure play hobbyists, and we love the space we're in. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick this over to Tim.
Hi, welcome. Thank you, Justin. My name is Tim Garcia. I am an information security engineer with a Fortune 100 financial services company. I'm located in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm also a SANS certified instructor. I teach mostly on the cyber defense curriculum, the 301, the 401, 501, 511 are security operations, and I'm so happy that Justin asked me to come on and be a security 555 instructor. I think it's a wonderful class. Hopefully you guys will too. I got the opportunity to sit in with Justin in Las Vegas at Network Security, and I learned a tremendous amount. I'm actually taking some of the things I've learned from that week in Las Vegas and applying it to my commercial SIM, so that way I can get better at threat hunting and identifying the evil in my environment, because it's something we want to get better at. Obviously, we all need to get better at it. If we look at things in the news, we know that we are not doing a great job at detecting evil. So this copy of this talk is going to be available shortly after this presentation at Justin's GitHub, smapper/presentations. Also, for those of you that are interested, a lot of the resources that we use in the SEC 555 class are also available at Justin's GitHub at HA Security Solutions. So there are a bunch of log stash configuration files. There are also a couple of other tools that can be used to identify things like beaconing and other type of malicious activity. Also, we want to send a shout out and a special thank you to Lee Holmes and the Microsoft PowerShell team for their tremendous tool and their research and just pure awesomeness that is PowerShell. Because we love PowerShell. I know Justin mentions it in the class over and over and over again, and you know, it's kind of funny because by the end of class, you're like, okay, Justin, we get it. We know you love PowerShell. But we love PowerShell as well. I am a huge fan of PowerShell. It's one of the best things ever invented. As a blue teamer, because I am pure play blue team, in my day-to-day job, I am all about blue. Right? Justin mentioned this before, and I love this phrase that he mentioned. He says, if I cut you, what do you bleed? I bleed blue just like Justin does. Okay, it's one of my favorite tools for administering and auditing my environment. When I teach the Security 401 Security Essentials class for SANS, I tell my students, you need to learn how to script. You need to learn it to improve your ability to identify evil in your environment, to gain better visibility into what's going on in your network, and also to set you aside from the rest of the crowd. If you are working in a SOC and you can script, you will see that you have the capability of moving up very quickly, because not everyone in the SOC knows how to script. And if I tell them, if you have to choose just one scripting language, then my recommendation is to learn PowerShell, because PowerShell is amazingly powerful. And as Justin mentioned, that you can use it for things outside of Windows. You can use it for all kinds of different access, right? Doing your IDS, doing your firewall. And this allows you to take those mundane, repetitive tasks and automate them so that we can focus on the analysis. That's where we're going to win. That's where we're going to get better at information security. We're automating those tasks with PowerShell. So I love PowerShell as a defender. And as much as I love PowerShell, because it has so many capabilities, the adversaries love it as much, because it is very powerful. It allows them to script things. It allows them to go out and take these powerful scripting capabilities that were previously lacking in Windows, and then now run things in an automated fashion so that they can focus their attention on what they're trying to do. Now, PowerShell is awesome, but as we said, it can be used for good as well as it can be used for evil. Just like I can use a hammer to build a house, a church, or a school, I can also use it to hit Justin over the head when he tells me how much he loves PowerShell. Okay, so it can also be used for evil. So PowerShell is an equal opportunity employer. It's used as much by the good guys as it is by the bad guys. In a recent report from Carbon Black, they identified that in some of their investigations, they identified that 38% of incidents involve PowerShell, and 68% of breaches involve PowerShell. Okay, now the problem is there's not been decent coverage on how to secure and detect these PowerShell attacks. That's one of our goals of this webcast, is to really identify how can we secure PowerShell and how can we detect these type of attacks in our environment by plugging them into the SIM and being able to bubble those things right up to the top. You know, another recent report came out from Symantec, and they estimated that over 95% of the PowerShell scripts that they analyzed from Blue Coat proxies were malicious. And when I hear that number, I think that's got to be, it kind of just blows my mind. I think 95%, what? That is just crazy. 95% of the PowerShell scripts that they analyzed were malicious. That means that the adversary is using those against us. And one of the reasons why the attackers loved PowerShell is because it's almost universally installed on every Windows system in our environment. Okay? I even know some crazy security SEC 555 authors that will install PowerShell in a Linux environment because they just love it so much. Okay, now Justin will install PowerShell on Linux because he would rather use PowerShell than Python. And I get that because he loves it. It's such a great and powerful tool. So most, if not all of our Windows environments have PowerShell installed and enabled by default. Another thing is that a lot of our PowerShell, or a lot of our Windows environments have multiple versions of PowerShell. We may have started out with PowerShell 1 and then install PowerShell 2, but we still have 1 installed. And we now move to 3 and we still have 2 and 1 installed. And then even if we upgrade to PowerShell 5, which you should be, you know, at a minimum PowerShell 5.0, but you still may have these previous versions installed. And because it's such an awesome tool for automating and administering our environment, it is whitelisted by all of our endpoint protection suites, right? If we're using App Locker or Software Restrictions Policy, it's going to be identified as an authorized tool because we need it. It's one of the things we have. So if our next gen whatever, our EDR, and you know, endpoint detection and response suites are all going to allow it because it's a tool that we need. Okay, and also PowerShell is the tool of choice because I can run PowerShell remotely. And there's a lot of pre-built attack tools that can actually be used to go out and attack PowerShell. Things like PowerSploit, which is a bunch of modules and for, you know, attacking your environment using PowerShell scripts. PowerShell Empire, which is a complete post-exploitation framework. And Nisheng, which is just a complete pen testing framework using complete PowerShell. Security researchers have even done things like porting common tools like Mimikatz directly into PowerShell. So now I don't have to go out and download Mimikatz. I just run a set of PowerShell scripts. I run invoked Mimikatz, and I dump credentials directly out of memory using, you know, DLL injection, some of the same type of techniques that are done through Mimikatz, completely running in memory within PowerShell. Also with things like Bash Bunny and USB Rubber Ducky, I can then put very small PowerShell commandlets into my Bash Bunny or into my Rubber Ducky, and as soon as I plug it into your USB device, it says, oh, that's a keyboard. And by the way, someone's typing on that keyboard running these PowerShell commandlets. And these PowerShell commandlets are now reaching out to the internet and downloading my complex script that allows me to completely own your entire environment. So there's a lot of capabilities with PowerShell that we need to be able to defend against and we need to be able to detect. And so that's what we're going to try to do with this webcast. We're trying to give you some tools and techniques that you can use to be able to detect this type of PowerShell evil. Now, with that, the question often becomes, well, if PowerShell is so evil, why don't we just disable it? Why don't we just get rid of it altogether? Well, you really need it. You really, truly need to have PowerShell in your environment. The benefits of PowerShell for administration, automation, gaining better visibility into your environment completely outweigh the evilness because the adversaries are good. Attackers, if they don't have PowerShell, well, they're going to use the command line, or they're going to use WMI, or they're going to use some other way to get what they want. So you're going to have to accept some risk somewhere. And so the benefits of PowerShell far outweigh the risk, in my opinion. Okay, it's just like Uncle Ben says in Spider-Man. PowerShell is an amazing tool, and with great power comes great responsibility. If we don't have PowerShell environment, the adversary is just going to find another way in. But we're going to be able to improve the visibility into our network, improve our ability to automate and administer our environment by having PowerShell installed. So we're going to have to accept that risk. And in most cases, in almost every environment, there are some exceptions to this, where the risk of PowerShell may outweigh, you know, the benefit. But in most cases, the benefit of PowerShell is substantially better than the risk. And so what we want to do is we want to start to identify what malicious PowerShell looks like as compared to what normal good PowerShell looks like. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do with this webcast. So we're going to give you some techniques. We're going to show you some additional logging capabilities built into PowerShell with the newer versions. We're also going to show you some ways within the command line logging that we can actually get better understanding and capabilities and visibility into our environment. So that's primarily what this talk is about. However, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the security features built into PowerShell. Okay? Now, this goal of this class is we're going to be looking at detection rather than prevention, specifically using SIEM and the log sources that we're going to talk about. However, there are some security capabilities that Microsoft gives us built right into PowerShell. So things like execution policy. Now, execution policy, a lot of people believe this is a security feature. but it was never really intended by Microsoft to be a security feature. Execution policy was created to prevent administrators, from actually making mistakes. So it's one of those things, kind of like UAC, where it says, hey, are you sure you really want to run that script? And then if you are certain you want to run that script, something I downloaded from the internet or something I created, then you have to actually take an additional step to say, yes, I want to actually run that script. So I have to change my execution policy. Now, it's very easy for me to bypass your execution policy. I'm not a pen tester. I am a blue teamer through and through. And I do know a little bit of the dark arts, a little bit of the pen test capabilities, but I personally know of over a dozen ways to bypass your execution policy if it's set to restricted. And it's not that difficult because it's meant not necessarily for a security feature. Another capability that Microsoft has given us with PowerShell version 5 is just enough administration, or GIA for short. This allows you to set fine granular controls on who can run what within PowerShell. I always liken this to something like sudo for Windows. So what I can do is I can say, okay, these particular group of users can run these PowerShell commandlets, and this group of users can run these PowerShell commandlets. So now it gives me awesome preventive capabilities, but also if someone tries to do something that they're not authorized to do, it gives me very effective detective capabilities as well. So it's going to cut a log if someone tries to run a commandlet that they're not authorized to do through GIA. So now I can look for that in my SIEM. And then we also have constrained language mode that allows you to, set your language mode to certain capabilities, so that way only certain functionality is able to be used within that particular PowerShell session. And that can, prevent, common type of malware type of functionality that we see often in malware. Now, even though that this, again, so we want to mention those briefly, but really what the meat of this presentation is about is catching PowerShell attacks at scale. And for that, we need two things. We need a SIEM, Security Information and Event Management Tool. Now, it doesn't matter if you're using a commercial SIEM or in the class in Sec 55, we show you how to do these techniques using the ALK stack. But it doesn't matter if you're using ArcSight or QRadar or insert your specific product here. I am taking these particular techniques and porting them into my commercial SIEM. And again, it may not be as easy in some cases as what we're able to show you in the class with ALK stack, but all of these techniques can actually be implemented in your commercial SIEM. You may need to work with your professional services. You may need to talk to the vendor in order to figure out how to do it. But all these capabilities can be done in your commercial SIEM. So we need a SIEM. We need something to be able to take in these log sources and be able to filter them down, enrich them, and then look for these certain types of activities. And then we need log sources. We're going to focus on PowerShell specific log sources. That's what I'm going to be talking about. And then Justin, I'm going to turn over to Justin that's going to look at some of the other command line logging sources that we can look for. Okay, things like, process create events, 4688, or some sysmon internal logs like, DLL requests, like, sysmon event 7, and those types of things. Okay, so let's look at some of these specific PowerShell logs. So one of the ones that came out with PowerShell version 3 is module logging. Now, when you enable it, you can go and you can enable it through group policy, right? You can go to computer configuration, administrative templates, Windows components, Windows PowerShell, and then it gives you this pop-up here. You turn on module logging. Then you go and it pops that up and it says, how do you want to set this up? Do you want it to be not configured, enabled, or disabled? I enable it, I click show, and then under the show names or the module names, I can set specific module names in which I want to log. Now in the screenshot here, you see that we are using the asterisk, which means I want to log everything. Now that may not necessarily be the most beneficial mechanism for your SIEM because that's going to give you a lot of information. However, it shows that you can actually do everything, or you can actually go in and log specific modules. So when you run that and a module gets executed, it will actually log both the module that's being executed as well as the parameters. So when we run something like invoke Mimikatz on a Windows 7 box with PowerShell version 5.1, you see that 8,555 event logs get cut from running that one script. So every time a module runs, it's going to log that in the module log, right? So that's going to be, it's going to actually create a separate log in your Windows event log. It's going to be under your application services log, Microsoft Windows PowerShell operational log that gets cut. And it cuts that 4103 event ID. Okay, now every time that module runs, it's going to cut an event. It's going to show you the module, it's going to show you the parameters. And even if a module gets run multiple times, it's going to log that every time it gets run. So as I said, doing the asterisk and logging everything may not be necessarily the best rule of thumb for going out and enable module logging. But in Sec 555, we give you some specific use cases where doing module logging can be very effective for catching the bad guy. Okay, so you see here in the screenshot, we see the parameters such as we see the command invocation of get delegate type, and you also see the system int PTR is the parameter that's actually being called. So that can be very important, good information for me to say, okay, that looks abnormal. That's not something I normally run in my environment. And Justin's going to show you some other ways with whitelisting that you can actually identify what are my normal parameters and my normal modules, and then look for those things that are not normal. Okay, so again, 8,555 events seems like a lot. You may be thinking, that's way too many events. I don't want to have to parse through that event. Well, with PowerShell version 5, Microsoft has given us script block logging. Now, when this is enabled in the same mechanism, you go in and you go into administrative templates, computer configuration, Windows PowerShell, and you enable it and turn it on in the same way we turn on module logging. Now, one thing to be aware of is that for almost all of these particular events, they are not enabled by default except in one rare case. So this script block logging is actually enabled by default when you have PowerShell version 5. Now, with the new versions of PowerShell, Microsoft included what's called an event type. So the event types are either info or warning. So for any type of event type of warning, which Microsoft deems to be suspicious commands, it will actually cut a log even if you don't explicitly enable it. It's automatically going to generate this log. Now, in some of the research that Justin's done, and I'm going to defer to him on this because he's done the research, he's actually stated that most of his legitimate commands were going to cut warning logs as opposed to malicious when he's running malware. So you may not get a lot of benefit, but what you want to do is you want to go into and explicitly enable it. By explicitly enable it, now it's going to cut a log and for every particular script. Okay, and now if you have a very large script that's greater than the 34,000 kilobyte size limit, then it's also going to break that up into multiple log events. And it's going to list them block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4, and so on. And so now we're going to say, here's the same block number, or block ID, or script ID, and then here's the block that's run and for each one of these events. Now, optionally, you can also do start and stop times, which will cut event IDs 4105 and 4106 if you want. That will show you how long a script was run. Okay? Now, one of the things to be aware of is that script block logging can be very beneficial. However, one of the things also to be aware of is that it actually runs and shows you it logs it at the time of execution. So one important thing to note is that the data, if I have base 64 encoded, it's going to show you the actual command that was run, the actual script that was run. So it's going to exist in a decoded format, which can be very good because I want that. I want to see the decoded data. However, it may affect my ability to be able to identify somebody that's doing base 64 encoded or some type of other encoding that can be used as a very good beneficial technique that Justin's going to talk about a little later. So again, it's a good thing that it decodes the data and it captures it during time of execution, so it shows you the decoded data, but it also takes away from that because now it doesn't give us the capability to say, okay, this is decoded, it only shows us the decoded data. Okay, so that's one of the things you want to be aware of as well. Okay, now in addition to that, we also have, again, you see here with script block logging that same invoke Mimikatz now cuts it down to 509 events as opposed to my 8,555 events. So we're getting a substantial reduction in the number of events. And again, this is going to be a little bit more easy to handle for our SIEM to ingest those logs. Okay, now we also see that we see the script that's actually run, so function main, we see the if statement that's being run, and so now we're seeing both what's actually being run from the system. Now, one of the things to be aware of that neither module logging or script block logging, they don't actually show you the output. They just show you the input. What script or what module was run, what parameters were run for module logging, or what actual scripts were run in the decoded format with script block logging. So with that, we want an additional log type called transcription log. This was also introduced in version 5, and this actually shows you both the input as well as the output, and it writes it out to a file. So it writes it out to a file, which means that ingesting into your logs, into your SIEM agent, is going to be a little bit more difficult. But what you can do, one of the techniques we talk about in Security 555 is actually creating what's called a blind drop box, where I can write my files, whether it be from something like transcription logging or from some third-party tool, like for example, the USB deview that actually logs USB insertion events. Write that out to a blind Dropbox that is able to write to, but nobody actually can modify or change or do anything to that blind Dropbox. And then you can have a log agent that goes out and pulls from that blind Dropbox to be able to ingest that into your SIEM. Now, again, we can actually, within the tool here, you go and you enable it, and then you can specify where to output that particular file to. Okay, so again, it also says, defaults to my documents with the year, month, day identifier. So we see that particular each day's log gets evented. Now you see with transcription logging, you see the initial command. So in this example, Justin's running an ls for DCO1 file share. And he specifically ran a command that would fail, so you could see that the command failed. So you see down the resulting output, access to the path DCO1 file share is denied. So now we can see both the input and the output. This gives us greater visibility into our environment. Okay, and this allows us to understand what's going on. Now, as I said, this is a lot of information because we're going to see, both we see the user that executed it. We also see potentially whether they ran the run as command. So there's going to be a lot of information. This may be too much information to ingest into your SIEM, but we can then parse some of this out to be useful for certain types of activities. Okay, so again, we can have a log agent that goes out and pulls that in and then parses out and filters just for specific types of events or specific types of activities that we believe to be malicious. Now, lastly, one of the things that I'm going to talk about before I turn it over to Justin is that we want to be able to log at the endpoint. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, that is just way too much information. If I start logging at the endpoints, I can't even keep up with the 1,000 servers I have or the 5,000 servers I have. How am I going to be able to possibly parse and capture and collect logs from 10,000, 100,000, 200,000 endpoints? Well, that's what you want to start to look to. Because with modern attacks, we don't see the server-side attacks as much as we used to. What we have is the normal kill chain process. The adversary goes out, performs a tremendous amount of reconnaissance. They target an individual in your organization, and then they will attempt to exploit that one individual, usually through something like a drive-by download or a phishing attack, or maybe even some type of watering hole attack. That means they're going to target the desktop or the endpoint. They're going to shoot through all of your systems. They're going to shoot through your firewall, your IDS, your IPS, and go right into the internal system and then pop that one box. Now, the benefit of this is that hopefully not all of your critical data resides on that one endpoint system. So now they're going to have to start to do certain things in order to move laterally, do that internal pivot to some other systems on your network. They're going to have to do things like dump credentials. They're going to have to escalate privileges. They're going to have to try to connect to other systems using things like PSExec. And those are the things we want to start to look for, because that's the process and the methodology they use. Now, we know that their malware and their techniques and all of the specific signatures aren't going to match, so blacklisting may not be a capability for us, but if we know that this is what they're going to do, we can start to look for those types of attacks. Okay, so we want to, instead of logging everything, which we don't want to do, that's way too much information. We want to start looking for actionable intelligence, actionable attacks that are indicative of adversary type of attack. Okay, and we can have agents that can help us to filter out the information from the endpoint before we send it over to our SIEM, so that we're only looking for this tactical evidence of information that we know is evil, or that we believe to be evil. We start to play with what some of you Security 511 alums will remember. We talk about the suspicious, malicious, benign game. We identify something as suspicious, and in 511, we're doing all of that from the command line. You know, we're doing cut and grep and set and awk. While here, we're doing the same techniques, but we're shipping it into our SIEM, and we're using our SIEM to then play that malicious, suspicious, benign game. We're taking all the information and what we believe to be suspicious, and we're feeding it into our SIEM. And now we can use our SIEM to set up dashboards and set up different types of information and indexes that says this is what we believe to be suspicious. Now I can focus my attention on the analysis, determining whether that suspicious activity is actually malicious or benign. And that's how we win when it comes to getting better at trying to detect the adversary. So I'm going to turn it over to Justin, who's going to talk a little bit about some of these command line logging events that we can take advantage of.
Yep, thanks, Tim. So think of it at this point, we're bringing in PowerShell logs, but we don't always need native PowerShell logs. So on the screen right now, we actually have 3 different attacks that I've performed. And these are all recorded with process creation events, which is 4688. It's not a PowerShell log itself. It is simply process creation. You open Notepad, that would cut a process creation event. But what it gives me is it gives me the executable that's launched, which in this case is PowerShell. And then it also gives me the command line parameters, which is where this becomes extremely powerful. So if you think about it, we as defenders tend to use PowerShell scripts. If we're using PowerShell interactively, we usually do PowerShell.exe, we hit enter, and now we're doing things like enter PS session, maybe some remote calls, but it's very short. Attackers on the flip side, they will run these long PowerShell command lines, and a lot of times they'll do encoding, which on the screen, the top 2 PowerShell commands are base64 encoded. And the reason they're doing that is they are trying to bypass things like antivirus and signatures. They're just passing it all through there. They're doing evasion. The bottom command, you can see the PowerShell encoded version, and then right below we see if they were to run it directly. Now here I'm running PowerShell, and I'm having it reach out to the web with this IEX, invoke expression, and it's pulling down this site. Really what I'm doing is a very short command to download a massive amount of PowerShell code and then run it en masse. This is useful for earlier when Tim was referring to like the bash bunnies or the rubber duckies. These are USB devices that emulate keyboards. I can literally walk into a building, plug into a computer into a USB slot, and a second later, I have a PowerShell-based command and control agent on the box phoning home to a server of my choice. It's that dangerous. But if you think about it, do you use base64 in your environment? Do you use long command line lengths? Do we pull down PowerShell code and launch it directly from a command prompt? And we don't. So this is an area where we're going to start to use the SIEM, and we're going to start to think tactically. Basically, knowing how the attackers operate and how they try to avoid our detection capabilities and our preventative techniques, how can we turn a strength of theirs and transform it into a weakness? And again, we've already got a quick preview of command line length, base64, and automatically downloading of code. You also have to think the way that these commands are being ran, it's so that they can run full-on PowerShell scripts without ever saving to a script file. Again, you and I as defenders, we write long PowerShell scripts and we run them. But those write to disk, which means your antivirus and every security product you have on the endpoint can scan it and see what it is. This is why they have a long preference for running PowerShell over the command line. So let's go into a few of these. So the command line length. Again, just a simple length check can find so much malware. You have these long strings, or frequently what I'll see is long sets of base64 encoded material. And a good threshold, you're just going to pick something and look for it. I like to start with alert anytime I see a 4688 event, which is a process creation event, that involves PowerShell and has a length check of over 500. Now, every SIEM can do this right out of the box. They all handle length checks. We're literally just looking at the command line, calculating the length, and boom, there's your threshold. And again, command lines tend to be shorter. Even if you have vendor products that do PowerShell, they still usually invoke either a script or it's a short command line. And even if there's an exception to the rule, this is the beauty of the SIEM. The SIEM is a slicing and dicing and filtering beast. So even when there are exceptions to the rules we're talking about, it's easy to exclude things. So command line length is an easy win. Base64, hey, we have a SIEM. We can do regex checks. Now, the regex on the screen I use to find base64 encoding. It is not a perfect regex. I'm just going to be clear cut. It is not a perfect regex pattern, but it's good enough. So in this slide, the bottom here was the original PowerShell command with all of its garbled base64 encoded message. What I've done is wrote a regex pattern up here that will extract that and save it to another field. The simple fact that base64 encoding is found, to me, is a huge red flag. Going to Tim's malicious, suspicious, benign, it is highly suspicious. I don't see base64 encoding hardly at all. You might have a few vendor exceptions because they're all crazy, we know that. You exclude them, and then you should not see base64 encoding. Now, if you can take this even a step further, your SIEM can actually convert and decode the base64. So here, in this case, I've used Logstash. I've parsed out using this regex pattern, and then I have the SIEM decoded. So now I have the original PowerShell command, and I have the decoded one. And now clearly we can find so many more things wrong with this. The ratio of uppercase to lowercase characters is way off. We as humans don't type that way. We see web client being invoked out to the internet. We see all sorts of wrong things going on here. So simply looking for base64 encoding, and if you can, decoding it, is a huge win. And again, the analyst on the other end of this, if you have the decoded command, can quickly move that malicious suspicious from suspicious to, hey, what the heck, that's evil. So base64 for the win. Now, we've been told time and time again that blacklisting is bad and is dead. And that is totally unfair and totally not true. I get that blacklisting is whack-a-mole. I totally get it. But quite frankly, it still has its use cases. So in here, we see PowerShell reaching out to the internet with invoked expression, and it uses the net web client as a web browser to pull down additional PowerShell code. In your environments, again, that shouldn't be happening. You shouldn't be doing that. Your vendor shouldn't be doing that. It's not secure. Even from a blue team, it's not a secure way of invoking code. So if I see IEX to something on the internet, I'm totally cool with making that a blacklist technique. And hey, rise this to the surface. I want to look into why that's happening. That is totally fair. Now, we've already went through 3 different ways of catching PowerShell attacks. We've got long command line lengths, we've got base64 encoding, and now we've got some form of blacklisting. They all work, and I do recommend all of them. But there's actually better ways of doing PowerShell detection, and much cooler, much more awesome techniques. So, one thing, PowerShell, as Tim referred to earlier, if you're on PowerShell 5, you still have older versions on your box. So if I'm attacking one of your systems, I know that PowerShell version 5 has awesome security. Again, the PowerShell team has done a great job with GIA and all the other security modes, but the problem is they are for version 5 in most parts. So what some malware or some attackers will do is they'll actually invoke PowerShell. They just will invoke it with a different version because it's on your box. Well, the good news is it's actually pretty easy to catch. In PowerShell, it will log event ID 400, which lets you know what engine version is being used. So in this picture, you see engine version 2, which means I switched out of 5, launched version 2, and now a log got cut, and that's very easy for you to catch. Basically, with your SIM, you just look for event ID 400 less than version 5 or whatever version you're rolling. You should be on version 5, hopefully. I think now it's 5.1. So downgrade attacks, we can catch that. All right, that's cool. Here is my hands to none favorite detection technique for PowerShell. I love this. It works extremely well. All right, let's cover it. So we have things like GIA. GIA, in some aspects, is almost like whitelisting for PowerShell, but it can be very hard and labor-intensive to deploy. I've never walked into an environment that they're actually using it, which is sad because it is fantastic. But you can't denial service yourself with that. What we can do, though, if we're taking PowerShell logs, this is taking PowerShell module logs into your SIM, and it's using its parsing capabilities to automatically extract the commandlets. So we look here. I'm pulling out get SSH session, remove SSH session, out null. I'm pulling out all of these. And in this case, I'm using Logstash. And here's how I'm pulling it out. Grab every time command invocation's seen, pull out the commandlet. Now, if you have a list of every PowerShell commandlet you run in your organization, what do you have? You have a whitelist. You have the knowledge of what your environment should be doing, which really means from your SIM, if you can extract the commandlets out, or even if this is too hard of an exercise for you, I have a PowerShell script you can run that'll do the same thing. It'll crawl through Windows Event Viewer and grab out these commandlets. So if you can't do the level of extraction I'm doing here with your SIM, which you hopefully can, you can do this manually with PowerShell very, very easily. You have a whitelist of commandlets. Now you have a text file or a CSV file with all these in it. You can turn around and feed that back to your SIM. And now you have automatic PowerShell commandlet whitelisting. This is crazy successful. Now, think of earlier, we were talking about invoke Mimikatz. Invoke Mimikatz uses things like sub-sign int as unsigned. We don't do that. I'm going to escape out of here real quick. We're going to go a little ad hoc. Hopefully Sans doesn't kill me. So think about this for a second. Let's just look at some of those attack frameworks. I'm just going to look at one. I want to take a look at invoke Mimikatz code. URA. Load up. If not, I think I've got this down. Oh, here we go. So as an example, in your environment, do you have a commandlet called invoke Mimikatz? Okay, maybe not. How about get 132 types? How about get 132 constants, 132 functions? We have all these different commandlets, sub, sign, int, unsign. This whole framework is just chock full of stuff you would never see. Again, just looking through here. How about invoke shellcode, invoke DLL injection, invoke WMI command? These are probably commandlets you're not using in your environment. So if you turn around and export this list either from your SIM or using a PowerShell, because again, PowerShell for Defenders for the win, this is one of the most powerful ways to catch PowerShell attacks. I ran this through thousands of samples of malware, and it has caught every single one of them. Now, it doesn't rise it to the surface and say equal equals evil. All that's going to say is, hey, I saw a new commandlet. Can you investigate this to see what's going on? You know, I write a lot of PowerShell codes. I don't write new commandlets every day, though. I might write them a few times, in which case you add it to your whitelist and move on. There is maintenance with this. But this is one of the most powerful things you can do. If you're wanting to catch PowerShell attacks, do this. It totally works. I've had high success with this. It's amazing. So, okay, whitelisting, my favorite PowerShell detection technique right here. Other things we have to consider, though, is PowerShell can be invoked without PowerShell.exe. PowerShell is software. On Windows, software really is a DLL. And specifically, it's one of these three DLLs: System Management Automation, System Management Automation NI, and System Reflection. These DLLs make up PowerShell. It is possible and trivially easy for malware or adversaries to launch PowerShell without calling PowerShell.exe. Black Hills Information Security, fantastic pen testing company. They have a write-up that is pretty easy to follow on how you can do this yourself. Now, if you're launching PowerShell outside of PowerShell, that most likely means you're going to be missing some of the other logs, like the command line log, because it's going to be invoked a different way. All is not lost. What you need to catch this is just something that monitors DLLs. Most of your endpoint suites can monitor these. So what you're looking for is one of these DLLs being launched from something other than like PowerShell.exe. Sysmon, which is a free tool from the sysinternals, Mark Russanovich's team wrote this, fantastic. You can deploy that and specifically look for event ID 7 that is not from PowerShell.exe. You can actually state, don't monitor any DLLs whatsoever except for these three and only when they're not from PowerShell.exe. It can do its own filtering. Effectively, you could deploy this with no logs being generated unless someone's doing something evil. And then you get this. Now I'm seeing in here, we see install utility.exe was what was invoked, and it's what's loading the DLL that allows the attacker to use PowerShell. So it's a tricky way of invoking it. And again, even though that's possible, I just want to be honest here. The best technique I can push this whole webcast is this one. Malware, there are ways actually to bypass script block logging. There are ways to bypass module logging. To my knowledge, transcription logging is the only one that I haven't seen bypassed yet, but at some point, if it hasn't already, it will be bypassed. But we have to be frank. The bad guys are not stepping up because our detection capabilities are so poor. In my true-to-life experience, I own my own consulting business, H&A Security Solutions. We go in and help organizations with defense, and we help with cleanup and things like that. This is by far good enough because 99.99% of PowerShell attacks are not the advanced ones. So doing something like a whitelist, you're going to catch all of it. And on the off chance they're stepping up their game, we can start doing more techniques. Again, like monitoring for the DLLs, which is actually still really easy to do. So I hope this was good for you guys. PowerShell is so amazingly powerful that it's also frighteningly scary. But we have many different techniques. Command line links, checking for encoding like base64. There are more techniques we didn't even cover in this webcast because we don't have time. For instance, obfuscation. Obfuscation would make it where the commandlets don't extract properly. But now you have a high ratio of special characters versus alphanumeric. And again, we can keep stepping up our game because SIMs can easily calculate that kind of thing. So at this point, I'm going to flash up the SIM Summit slide again because I'd love for you guys to go there. It's nothing but actionable detects. I'm personally vetting all the talks. It's going to be amazing. And we can open up for questions because hopefully you guys have some pretty good questions.
All right. Well, thank you for that great presentation. We do have a couple questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first question is there a way to use PowerShell to configure module logging?
Yes, PowerShell can do anything. If you want it to cook your eggs in the morning, you can make it happen. No, PowerShell can directly change group policies as well as local security policies. So you could script out PowerShell logging. The best way to enable PowerShell logging, though, is group policy, and then do what you're asking about maybe for a DMZ that's not joined to the domain.
All right, thanks. What do you like to use or prefer to use as a log shipper to the SIEM?
That question is highly dependent on what your SIEM is. If we're talking about open source agents, I'm a huge fan of NXLog as well as WinLogBeat because those seem to have more feature sets, better stability, and biggest thing is these are huge logs and they have advanced filtering capabilities. Like if you did the whitelisting technique I was talking about, you could dump that to a file and you could have those agents not ship off logs that match your whitelist. Effectively, you receive no logs unless it's an exception, which is important because a tactical SIEM has to be able to handle the volume of data.
Thank you. Why does PS allow for the use of encoded commands in the first place?
Because you should be able to do anything with PowerShell. You never know when you might have to do something weird.
Thanks. Can we get the PowerShell script you mentioned to pull all, I'm going to mispronounce it, SIEM DLETS? God, I'm not sure what they mean by that.
Let me see if I can see the question
command list
directly.
So I think it's the whitelisting.
Oh, command list.
I think he's referring to.
Yeah,
I think he's referring to the PowerShell script to do the whitelisting if you can't do it through your SIEM.
Oh yeah, so tell you what. So what I'll do for that is I will put that on that same GitHub, and I'll create a new repository that'll call PowerShell. I'll call it PowerShell extract commandlets, and I'll place it there for you.
All right, thanks. Should you enable both module logging and script block logging at the same time?
I'm a big fan of that, yes. I'm a big fan of turning both logging on because script block logging decodes the data and records it as it actually is, and it is less logs, but then I'll do module logging because it's easier to whitelist. But again, if I have an agent, I can make it where module logging is logging everything to the desktop, but anything that is on the whitelist never gets shipped off by the agent to the SIEM, where maybe script block logging I still will. To be honest, I'll filter a bunch of the script block logs locally as well, but they're all logging to the desktop. They're just not all being sent off to the SIEM. We skipped over a large portion of filtering techniques just for time. 555, in order to be a tactical class, we highly emphasize and show examples of how to do advanced filtering.
Someone says this sounds like more of a suggestion, but I don't know if you have anything to add. They say good examples on ingesting transcripts into Elasticsearch. Good examples on ingesting transcripts. And then they say into Elasticsearch would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, so the easiest way to do that would be exactly what Tim said, where you send it to a blind Dropbox. Like you set up a Windows file share, you allow write permissions, but you don't need read or anything else. And then you can drop a single agent on that server itself, like FileBeat, and that will easily share those transcripts over to Logstash for parsing and then Elasticsearch. Same concept applies for a commercial SIEM. Single file server, group policy tells all the transcription logs to go there, single agent, you're done.
When PowerShell cooks your eggs in the morning, does it do better with scrambled or sunny side up? I'm going to answer this. It's going to do it best however way you like it most, right?
It's going to dynamically figure out my mood and change the eggs accordingly.
That's what I figured.
That's how powerful it is.
All right, the next real question.
Yeah, that's how powerful it is.
Yeah. Do you need to know PowerShell before attending the 555 course?
Absolutely not. In fact, we don't go into PowerShell scripts directly at all, although there's a few on the USB I hand out. No. Most of the techniques we show how to catch the bad guys, but you don't have to. We cover a lot of topics in 555, from NetFlow to DNS to Windows to Linux to security systems to sandboxes. It's all over the board, and you only need a high-level knowledge of those systems.
All right, thanks. You have a compliment. Awesome PowerShell, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more question. When choosing logs to send to the SIEM, do you prefer to get only specific logs or get all and then filter out what you don't need?
Oh, fantastic question. Option B. I prefer to start with everything, but then I immediately search through that data and start to filter things out as much as I want. The reason being, if I upgrade Windows to Windows 10 to the Net Creators Update and it cuts new logs I didn't know about, if I was already filtering, I would never get them. With the method of collect everything, but then immediately study it to see what you can filter out, I will get new data. It's just, if you do that, then once a week, once a month, you need to be looking at your data and updating your agents to filter new stuff out.
All right, thanks. Do you also show how to alert in 555?
Yes, we do. We actually have a lab on deploying an alert engine and setting up different types of rules. And the coolest thing we show in 555, one of my favorite things, is how to do a rolling dynamic whitelist so that you don't have to export the data and set up the whitelist. Mind blown right there.
Yeah.
They did specify
And one of the other things,
alert from the SIEM or open source alerting tools. I don't know if it
I'm
needs to be
sorry, can you
clarified.
repeat that again?
So the original
No, I just didn't
question,
hear you.
do you also show how to alert in 555, which you were answering, and then they sent in alert from the SIEM or open source alerting tools?
To be honest, in that one, we do open source alerting tools that are specifically built for Elasticsearch. The concept would apply to commercial SIEMs, but it's funny because even if you had a commercial subscription to Elastic itself, because it has a commercial offering, I actually steer folks away from using their alert engine because the free one we use in class is better currently. If you're an Elastic employee, I'm sorry, you're getting better.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention too, this is Tim. So one thing I want to mention too is in addition to that, we also have, I mean, Sec 555 has, 5 days worth of boot camp in which you're doing hands-on every evening from 5 to 7, roughly 5 to 7 p.m. And also, we also give you a full 6 month access to the boot camp. So even after you leave class, right, it's not just every night you get to continue to do that, but in the boot camp, there are several boot camp questions in which you are, generating and creating alerts using the ElastAlert engine from Yelp. So, I mean, it gives you, we are focused mostly on a lot on the hands-on with Security 555, giving you actionable real world stuff that you can use and learn from and take this information. So even after you leave, you're going to get, you'll still have access to the boot camp in which you can continue to play with and learn these tools and techniques.
Yeah, that's actually a great thing I forgot to mention. The boot camp is so long, there's no way for you to even finish it during class, but it is nothing but hands-on, take home, immediately apply techniques that will take you probably at least as long as you sit in the class to finish at home. And again, you have 6 months access to it. It's the only SANS class that does this.
All right. Would you recommend these logging techniques with a server count of over 80K?
Yes, I would. Because again, by default, a Windows box will log, let's just say it logs 10 events per second. That's insane. Times 80,000 servers, that's insane. But that's not what I'm recommending. What I'm recommending is only collecting specific logs. And there's a big difference between logging locally and actually shipping off logs to your SIEM. So you might be generating anywhere between 1 and 10 EPS on your server, or maybe even more, but what you're shipping off to the SIEM is a fraction of that.
Would that be long tail analysis when filtering, or explain long tail analysis?
So for filtering, we're actually doing the fat tail analysis. So it's long tail analysis in reverse. Like if you were to start sending all logs into your SIEM, one of the exercises we do in class is we send all Windows logs in, and then we analyze them with long tail analysis, but we're not looking for the least common events, we're looking for the most common events. And in that lab, you go from however many logs it is, and by the end of the lab, you've identified where you can filter out over 90% of your logs, which is exactly what I'm recommending. And even if you have compliance, we address that in the class as well. How can we address compliance? Because compliance says I must keep logs for X amount of time. We totally address that.
All right, well, that's all we have. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
PowerShell is awesome. Tim, how about you?
I just want to say, I mean, again, I sat 555 and I'm an instructor. Obviously, I'm biased, but Justin has done a tremendous amount of work for this course. And it's one of the only courses, as Justin mentioned, with the full 6-month boot camp. And it's also one of the only courses with the smart videos for every one of the labs. So every one of the labs that you do, not only do you get an opportunity to do it, but you actually have smart videos integrated. So after you do it, or even before you do it, you can watch a video of Justin walking through each one of the lab activities and explaining why he's doing what he's doing. So this allows you to reinforce your learning. And it has smart videos integrated in which you can, has closed captioning capabilities. You can search for a particular keyword and it'll take you right to the point in that video where that keyword is being mentioned. So again, I just want to commend Justin on the tremendous amount of work he's done, and just encourage everybody to go out and look at this class if you are doing any type of SIEM analytics, because again, we talk about elk stack, but these techniques could be applied whether you're using any commercial SIEM out there. It may not be as easy, but it's something that you can definitely take and apply to your commercial SIEMs.
Yep. Oh, and I didn't mention this earlier, but the SIEM Summit, I am building a free 2-day SIEM-based net wars for all attendees. And again, I'm not making a dime for that. It just shows how much of a nerd I am.
All right, well, thank you so much, Justin and Tim, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.